Okay, so I have a confession. I intentionally put myself last in the seminar series because I wasn't quite sure what I was going to talk about. And thank you, Matt, Mike, and Bonnie for going ahead of me. We had a really excellent series. I'm very excited. And they inspired me to think about my own work in a different light. I also have another confession. I was so excited about today's talk, I woke up at 1:30. So I just want to tell you that so you're aware of what's happening with me right now. My work, what I'm trying to do in this one, and this is a prototype talk. I have to be honest, I've never given this talk before. In fact, some of the slides I made just minutes ago. So what I'd really love for you is, from you is some feedback. A lot of this involves work that you all did in the room, work that I did with my colleague Jeannie Olson, work that I've done with Design for America, work that I've done with my new graduate students. Some of this stuff is literally fresh off the press, and I'd love to hear your opinions on it. So what I want to talk today about is how people understand and learn about their own abilities through collaboration mediated by technology. And I want to be really clear about technology. Technology can be defined as digital technology, as you think about it. It can be defined as practices, processes. I have a very general notion of what technology is. Anything that helps you to accomplish your work. And in this case, I'm really interested in innovation. So why does this matter? Why is innovation important? Today, November 15th, Chicago, Illinois, there's a lot of things going on. This is just some stats I pulled up today. Almost half of children in Chicago are obese. This one blew me away. 53% of adults have low or limited literacy in Chicago. 53%, right? I mean, think about that. That means you have difficulty filling out a job application. You have difficulty reading basic instructions. 53%. That's very high compared to the national average. But this is in Chicago. This is right where we live. And so I've been thinking about this a lot, and I've been thinking these challenges don't solve themselves. We can think about these challenges, but they're not going to go away, and they're not going to solve themselves. What we really need is people behind them. And I'm going to argue that we need people like this. This is a woman who Isri introduced me to. Her name is Sarah Elizabeth Ippel, and she's the founder of the Academy of Global Citizenship, which is on the southeast side of Chicago. She started this school in 2008, and she is an innovator. And here's what she does. She has things called a walking school bus, which means when people go to school in the morning, instead of a school bus coming around to pick them up, there's essentially a walking school bus. There's a walking parade of people that come and pick them up. When they get to school, they're growing vegetables in their organic garden in their backyard, and they're having organic breakfasts. So this is a woman who has a domain expertise in education and is thinking in radical ways about how to reform and address some of the problems that exist. But it's people like her that we need to address these issues. So from a theoretical point of view, we often think about innovators in this way. We think about them as having domain expertise. So Sarah Elizabeth is an educator. She served on elite boards in education. Having analytical thinking skills, having creative thinking skills, and having social skills. But what I would argue is the thing we don't think about is the belief in the ability to innovate. So this precedes everything. If you don't believe in your ability to innovate, you're not even going to attempt to innovate. And here's an interesting school book picture. Anybody recognize who this is? Great. Okay, so we can think about these two people sitting right next to each other, Stephen and Carla. I actually don't know Carla. She's probably a wonderful woman. But what I was thinking about this when I was looking at this picture is I was thinking, perhaps they both have the same domain expertise, and perhaps they have both the same skills. But perhaps their belief in their ability was different, and that's what set them apart. Why does this matter? The reason this matters is because innovation, quite frankly, we know what the benefits are, but it's really hard work. It's unpredictable, it's controversial, it's often in competition with the status quo. Anybody know what this house is? Steve Jobs' parents' house. The first Apple computers were made in his parents' spare bedroom in this house. They eventually upgraded to the garage against the status quo. So what do I mean by innovation? Here's what I mean, just so we're all on the same page. Innovation is defined as novel and useful ideas implemented. And innovation self-efficacy, or this belief in your ability to innovate, I define as a belief in ability to innovate. What's interesting to me about these two things is that they're reciprocal. So you need a belief to innovate, and then innovate informs innovation. The act of innovation informs belief. So this is a reciprocal process. And this notion is built on Banduraâ's social cognitive theory of self-efficacy. He has this notion that basically you build beliefs in your ability in three primary ways. The first thing you do is you see other people doing it. So I see somebody else like me doing it. And I think maybe I can do that. That's called vicarious learning. Another way you do it is somebody tells you you can do it. We hear a lot of this in school. This is called social persuasion. You can do it, you can do it. This is what cheerleaders do for you, mentors, etc. Then the most effective way is mastery experiences. This is doing it. So you actually do it yourself and you say, wow, I did that. I'm going to do that again. Does that make sense? Those three general ways make sense to people? Great. So what's the role of technology in all this? Has she talked about technology? Are we in an engineering building? What is this about? This is what's really interesting to me about technology, is that technology mediates the way that we hear, see, and do things, right? It's fundamentally changed the way that we can see similar others doing things, hear from people who support us, and actually do things relatively rapidly. Let me give you some examples. Or first, let me start with my research question, and then I'll give you some examples. So the question I'm looking at is, how do people learn about their own abilities through collaborations mediated by technology? Let me give you some examples to illustrate what I mean by this. This is hearing that you can innovate. Anybody not listen to TED Talks? Wow, that's really cool. 0. Okay, great. So anybody know this TED Talk? It's actually not a TED Talk. It's a commencement speech that TED put on their website, which I thought was very interesting. The best of the web. This is the commencement speech that Steve Jobs gave in 2005. Does anybody know this speech? Great speech, right? When do you listen to it?
I listened to it when I was, I believe, first year in college.
Anybody else remember when they listened to this?
This summer, I discovered it this summer.
You discovered it this summer? Yeah?
I listened to it when I was applying to law because it came through what I wanted to.
Yeah. Anybody else? That's really amazing, right? You listen, this is a videotaped speech. This is not like I was there in a room. This is a videotaped speech, and the three of you can remember when you listened to it. I can remember when I listened to it because I did something pretty risky the next day. This is a drawing that Jeannie Olson, who's laughing, just sent to me yesterday. This is about seeing others can innovate. I'm remodeling my lab space upstairs, and I've been talking about it forever. And Jeannie woke up also early in the morning, we have that in common, and mocked this up in Google Sketch and sent it to me and said, Liz, this is what you can do with your office, right? She's not an architect, but she very quickly used Google SketchUp to do this. And I was very inspired to get my act together once I saw this and saw her doing this work. And then the last example of doing it and the way that technology enables people to do it is crowdfunding platforms, which I'm going to get into more detail about. This is one from Indiegogo, and this is Saba, who started this company called Bags for Bliss. And really interesting idea here, which is basically she went back to her home country of Pakistan and started working with these girls who were spending 14 hours a day doing textile work instead of going to school. And she said, how can I help these group of women? She said, okay, I'm going to have you doing an hour of textile work, actually making these bags for Bliss. And the other hours, you're going to be going to school. And I'm going to pay you 3 times as much for that 1 hour work as you got for 14 hours of work. So this satisfies the family needs for income. It educates the girls who are often not exposed to this kind of education and gets them, honestly, in a better situation in life. So how did she make this happen? Well, one of the things she did is she went on this Indiegogo, this crowdfunding platform, and she put up a little video about her idea, and she asked for money. She's actually still in the process. This is today. She has 47 days left to raise. Her goal is $25,000. She's at $3,500. And the stats show if you basically get past 0, you're very likely to fund the whole thing. So I'm hopeful. I'm going to follow her over the next 47 days and see what happens. But she just did it. And what happens is that some of the research we're finding is that other people, well, first of all, she's gaining confidence in the fact that this is potentially a business that she can run because people are financing her with actual money. And other people are learning from her by watching this example. So looking back at Banduraâ's social cognitive model, we can see that technology is potentially, in these different ways, helping people to have these mastery experiences doing it, helping people to see others innovating, and hearing more readily that you can act in these ways. I'm going to share 5, so that's the intro. I'm going to share 5 projects, and depending on the time, we'll see if we can get through all of them, from my own research that has helped to inform and answer this question: how can technology inform these beliefs in our ability? I'm going to start with a crowdfunding project that we literally just started, so this is some of the data that's fresh off the press. So crowdfunding is this idea that the financing of a project comes from individuals in a crowd rather than bankers or investors. And what's really interesting right now is that the internet is changing the number and the type of people we can connect with. But in some sense, crowdfunding is actually quite an old concept. Anybody recognize this scene? Right? I mean, this is essentially crowdfunding, right? And anybody recognize this scene? Right? I was showing my husband these slides last night, and he's like, that man has a really nice coat on, and he's only giving $5 to the church. It was very funny. Anyway, but anyway, it's the passing the basket at church. But what's happening now is we have the internet, again, as I said, connecting these more disparate people. So it's no longer about physically passing a hat. You're actually passing a hat in a much more expansive way. And what particularly interests me is not just the passing of the hat for any kind of endeavor, but the ones that really support innovation work. And so what we've been doing most recently is looking at the 3 most popular crowdfunding websites for innovation work. And those are Kickstarter, Rocket Hub, and Indiegogo. And thank you to everybody in the room who has helped us make contacts with these people. It turns out this is a wonderful group to study in a college environment because many people participate, many of you in the room. Actually, show of hands who's participated here. Can you raise them a little higher? I can see them. Okay, great. Thank you. I'm mostly just looking for people we can do research on. Thank you. So this is quite a popular phenomenon. This is a chart put out by Kickstarter, one of the most popular crowdfunding platforms, just to give you a sense of how much funds are being raised. This is from April 2009 when they started till March 2011. And the numbers are just going up and up and up. And many people thought, oh, this is going to wear out. This is a phase. This is going to wear out. But people continue to raise funds on these platforms. And actually, Liz Gerber, one of the students in my lab, just raised a point. Last week, there was actually a piece of legislation out about crowdfunding. And McHenry in the House of Representatives said, it's clear that we need new ways to help small businesses and entrepreneurs take their ideas from the dinner table to the production line. The first step is to modernize outdated regulations that stand as barriers to American innovation. So this is the government talking about crowdfunding as a barrier or as a potential useful element for innovation. The legislation will ensure that our small businesses are not left behind. Crowdfunding can help give them the means to create jobs for hardworking individuals here at home. And what's interesting is this has support from both parties. So crowdfunding has now become a political move, which is really interesting. Let me give you an example of how this works. These are 2 guys named Dave and Dave. Anybody know them? Just curious. This is a little story about how they created the project Coffee Julies on Kickstarter. So they ran the project from March 29th to May 2nd, 2011. Their goal was to raise $9,500, and they raised $306,000. Like that's pretty great. So they didn't go to banks, they didn't go to venture capitalists. They went to the crowd through Kickstarter. Let me show you a few more details. These are Coffee Julies. And these address a problem that perhaps everybody in the room has once had. Anybody have hot coffee that then gets cold just a little too quickly? Okay, they did. And this was their solution. So these have a phase change proprietary, I tried to get more details on it, but proprietary substance in it that basically when your coffee first goes down and it's way too hot, like mine was this morning at 1:30, the beans actually absorb the energy, and then when it cools off, they release the energy, keeping your coffee warmer 2 times as long. So here's what they had to do to make that possible. They went on to Kickstarter. They created a very short video which would last, this pledge I think lasted 60 days. They created a very short video explaining what it was, and then they put out a set of rewards and said, if you give us money, here's what we'll give you. And here's what they did. They said, if you give us $50, we'll give you this, your very own set. And if you give us, I think this was $100, we'll give you this larger set. And if If you give us even more money, we'll give you this much larger set. So that's just an example. Everybody does rewards differently, but you always get something for having donated. So, and every creator or innovator has to actually set out the different types of rewards, and they really vary quite broadly. For example, some people invite you to have dinner with them. That's a very, if it's a more well-known person. Other people give you a personalized product in some way. Some people give away prototypes as part of the prize. So all sorts of different rewards. And so the thing, so that's just an example of how Kickstarter works, so you understand that basic. So the question I had is, how do people learn about their abilities in this kind of work? And so our initial interviews are showing things like this, which is quite interesting. And this is a quote from Simple Scott, who was actually here. Did anybody hear him a couple months ago? Really interesting, yeah. Basically did this book. He was one of the graphic designers for the Obama campaign, and he published this book. And he said this when we interviewed him. He said, "I had a firm idea of what kind of book I wanted to publish. I wanted my book to be high quality. Other publishers wanted my book to be a cheap paperback format. That's not what I wanted." And so he talked a lot in the interview about maintaining the creative control over using this kind of platform. Edward Boatman, who did the Noun project, which is a really interesting open source logo project, I encourage you to check it out, said, having the chain of support encourages others to exceed. So he talked a lot about how wonderful it was to put his project up there and get other people supporting him. The funders were writing comments down below, encouraging him to keep up the project, and he actually has become friends with many of the people who funded his project afterwards. This is an interview with Alon, who started Rocket Hub. Had a really interesting notion when we asked him about beliefs and how people engage in Rocket Hub. And he said, well, you're embedding yourself in an active community. These are his words. You are being validated. Friends and family become evangelists for you. These are completely normal people. He's referring to the innovators. And they are working way outside their comfort zone. With crowdfunding, you're allowing people to do something. You have plenty of people saying, I believe in you. So just to step back and say, this is just an extreme contrast to anybody who's ever tried to manufacture or sell an idea to a company. Usually what you don't have is people cheerleading for you. Usually what you have is people saying, no, 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 won't work, no, no, won't work, right? Very different. So this is just a radically different notion. In fact, there's a man named Scott Wilson who was trying to make the TikTok watch. Anybody know about this watch? It's a watch that has the iPad, or rather Nano on it. And he went to Nike, he tried to sell it there. He went to Apple, tried to sell it there. Nobody would buy his idea. He put it on Kickstarter. He raised close to $1 million, okay? So no, 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 yes, 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 right? I mean, that's like, just to give you an idea, contrast. Now Apple has asked that he manufacture the product for their store, okay? It's a really interesting turnaround, and I think it's gonna be in stores coming up very shortly if it's not already. So from being told no, 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 no to I love it, 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 you know, almost not a million times, but a very high number of times. It's a very different experience from an innovation perspective. This is a interesting conversation we had from DeRoy that I think crowdfunding really captures well. He said, when I put a creative project out in the world, nothing is more exhilarating than knowing a bunch of people are really excited about it. And this is the part I like. Pledged money is a pretty undeniable measure of excitement. The coolest thing is that more than 95% of the pledgers were complete strangers. So I think this is pretty neat. For me, this reminded me of when I was selling chocolate bars as a kid to fundraise for our school, and I knew I could always go to my mother for like at least $20 worth of bad chocolate, right? Anybody have that experience? Like, you can always go to your mom, she'll help you out there. But then it was like when you got beyond your mom and you were able actually to sell product. In this case, I did not make the chocolate bars, but when you were actually able to sell something to somebody else, there was a certain amount of value that I think from an innovation perspective, we don't often see that value in that numerical way that closely. I can actually ask Mert and Yuri, have you guys sold any of your products yet? Yeah. Yeah. No, not yet. Would you like to sell at least one? Would that feel good?
That would be awesome.
Yeah, okay. Okay. How many years has it been?
It's been a little over 2 years.
Okay.
We do have 5 hospitals signed up to buy, though. I mean, I say buy as in money in my bank. That has nothing.
Okay. So it would be nice.
That would be awesome.
Okay, good. And then the last quote I have here is, this is an interesting, we were asking Alon about the funder's perspective. It's like, okay, I get what the creators get out of this, but what do the funders get out of it, right? They get a product, maybe, maybe not. And he had shared this story. He said, when people come by, they want to say something. They get to say, I'm supporting a research project. They get to feel that they are scientists, even though they are not. It's a game changer. It's a new movement. And he was talking about this story in the context of this project about dorsal fins of dolphins. This one was doing research. And if you engaged and you supported this innovative research project, you actually got a little replica model of a dorsal fin, which doesn't excite me, but I guess really did excite the people who bought into this, so much so that they'd put them on their desks and show them off and say, you know, I'm supporting this research. Isn't this, and what does this say about me? I'm an innovator just even in my support of this. This is from an interview with Charles Adler, who started Kickstarter, and he said something really interesting. He said, we were asking him about the design elements of the site. He said, we designed it to give the idea of confidence. And then he told me the story that I shared with you earlier about Scott Wilson. Scott Wilson went to Nike and didn't get funding, and then went on to Kickstarter and got funded. He wanted to use Kickstarter to prove that he could do it to himself and to others. Scott just got his product in the Apple stores. He had the credibility, having worked at Nike. You not having investors look at you and say, what's the business model? So a totally different reframing about how ideas get funded. Additional benefits beyond kind of beliefs and ability, we found initial analysis is that innovators not only get resources, which is kind of the obvious answer, right? Why do you use funds? These crowdfunding, you're looking for resources, but actually they're getting a lot more. They're getting network and community, identity and validation, creative freedom and opportunity. And from the funder's perspective, they're not just giving away money. They're actually also getting network and community. They're actually building their identity as being associated with this innovative group. And they're actually getting creative expression. They're actually able to share their ideas about the project in the comment box. And one of the successful tips on these crowdfunding website is to never talk about it as my project, talk about it as our project. This is really just a totally different reframing of how these things can happen. So this is a very different perspective in terms of the limited research that's been done in the space. Most of the research has looked at crowdfunding from the perspective of entrepreneurial finance, right? These people are very interested in how people can get money very easily. And also computer scientists starting to look at how trust is developed based on the textual statements. There's some a really fun study that was just recently done looking at how is it that people actually ask for money and what can they get. And then also just looking at the role that the consumer, as Nadieski uses, can play. Are they passive? Are they social? Or are they a fan? Are they actually advocating once they fund a project? Do they then go out and tell all their other friends about it? Are they inspirational role? Are they actually giving suggestions for how to improve it? So the work that we're looking at is, the idea is how can we look at crowdfunding as a way of actually giving confidence to young entrepreneurs to have successful first experiences and then go on and on. And we actually it looks from the research that once people get their project successfully funded, there's actually a decent chance that they'll go again and again and again, which is getting more people involved in this kind of work. So we're continuing more interviews and also just looking at what are the design elements of the website and the interaction that actually encourages mastery experiences, vicarious learning, and social persuasion. So that was on crowdfunding. It's some very new work. I'm very excited about it. Still going back to this question though, how do people learn about their own abilities through collaboration mediated by technology? I'm going to share a second story a second research project that's very different than crowdfunding. It's about rapid prototyping. And you may say, well, again, technology? Yeah, technology. Rapid prototyping is a process for realizing ideas rapidly. Making physical or virtual manifestations of concepts to test their viability and communicate ideas to others. Oftentimes you use tools. There's many tools down in the shop that you may use to rapidly prototype an idea, but there's also low-tech tools. Like, does anybody recognize that silvery material in the picture? What? What? Aluminum foil, high tech. And do you know what they were prototyping here? Unless you're from the Bay Area, you may not get it. Anybody? They were prototyping a new ticket machine for the Bay Area BART train. You may recognize it when you go out there. It doesn't look anything like that. But wouldn't that be fun if it did? Excuse me. So this was actually a pretty intensive study. I had 35 practitioners learning and adopting this rapid prototyping practice in a high-tech firm. It involved 444 hours of observation and interviews, and it lasted over 18 months. And I just tell you that as a way of saying the research I do is actually takes quite a bit of time and is quite intensive. And that's pretty important for when you're doing grounded theory building, to make sure that the mechanisms and the processes you're seeing are not just one-offs, but actually a phenomenon that occur over time. So what I found in the study was that rapid prototyping, from a psychological perspective, we've looked a lot at what rapid prototyping accomplishes from a practical perspective. It helps people communicate ideas to other people. It helps them make decisions. But from a psychological and self perspective, it allows people to break large tasks into modest-sized tasks. Because when you're prototyping, you can only prototype one thing at a time. And when you're working on modest-sized tasks, you're allowed to take frequent action. And when you take frequent action, it supports a sense of forward progress. So if something's so big, you won't start it, but if it's smaller, you'll start it. Anybody working on any exam papers or any papers right now? Yeah? What are tricks for getting started, Eleanor?
Just write something.
Just write something, break it down, write it small task, right? If you just think about writing the whole thing, you get overwhelmed. You think about prototyping, one small part, not so overwhelming. And then another thing that interestingly happens, I bet when you're writing your paper, once you get one page down, say, oh, okay, I did that. A small win in some ways. You're able to observe the impact and attribute your success to your actions and strengthen your belief about your. So you do that one page and you think, oh, I did one page, I can do more, I can do more, I can do more. And the more you do, it reduces the impact of any one idea being a failure. So once you get 5 pages written, if you write one really bad paragraph, move on, right? The more you do, the more attempts you take, the less anyone hurts. Let me ground this. This is from Grace, who is an interaction designer, and she was tasked with an assignment of creating an online community. It was quite a big assignment, and she was pretty overwhelmed. She reported being pretty overwhelmed by it. And then she described this process using rapid prototyping to make it through this process. She said, I had a whole bunch of sketches that I gave to him, the developer. So she's in a room, and she doesn't really know where to start, and she gets out some sticky notes, and she starts drawing and laying it out. And she says, and over the New Year's weekend, we essentially designed the thing and implemented it. So I still owe him. But it's like, here's the goal, here's some sketches, and by January, we actually had a system. So he used this wireframe, this low-tech wireframe system for mocking it up. And I would argue that without the technology of this being a technology, this being a technology, and the computer, she wouldn't have been able to realize the ideas that quickly. And so it's quite interesting the way in which she used prototyping to make progress in her work. I've done some related work that I won't talk about today, looking also at the psychological experience of user research, brainstorming, and improvisation. Take away the objective efficacy of what you're trying to actually accomplish and look at what does it actually accomplish for me. And the reason this study came about was because I was noticing people continuing to do things that weren't necessarily meeting their goal that they said, but they continued to do it. And I said, well, this is interesting. Why is it that we continue to do this? Does anybody have anything like that in their life that they continue to do, although it's perhaps not that effective? Okay, great. You can relate to that. Okay, the next one, so we're doing well on time, really grew out of that last study. Because I was hanging around for 18 months, I heard a lot of managers complaining about what worked and what didn't work. And one of them was talking about brainstorming. And she said this, she said, lack of preparation means, for the brainstorm, means that more often than not, the sessions turn out to be a waste of time. And increasingly, even the mention of brainstorming meets with eye rolls. Does anybody feel that way? I feel like you have to be over a certain age. Oh, we still have some nods. That's good. I feel like cynicism about brainstorming sets in a little later in life. Is that about right? Eleanor's laughing. Yeah, maybe there is an age break. Anyway, so I was thinking about this and thinking, wow, this is something that people do like earlier, but then later it kind of becomes laborious and it's in conflict with other work. And actually, people started reporting to me, some people just feel insecure because they're at this point in life, you've either been deemed a creative or a not creative. And if you're not creative, showing up, I get some head nods, like showing up and being the not creative of these brainstorms gets a little tiresome. So I was working with Patty Bow. Patty, can you raise your hand? Come on, Patty. Okay. on this project, and thinking about this from a goal-setting perspective. And what we know about Locke and Latham's goal-setting perspective is basically goals increase performance because they direct and sustain attention and effort towards goal-related activities. So does anybody have a goal right now? Jeannie, do you have a goal?
Oh, yes.
What's one?
My goal is to get my laundry folded before I do it.
Okay, good. So is it directing and sustaining your attention?
Pretty much, it started with
Yeah, it's okay.
every time I walk into the house, it's the first thing I think of.
Good. So if your life was just to, if your goal was just to get your act together, that would not be specific, challenging, or accompanied by commitment and feedback about progress. So just as a note to self, when you're making goals, make them specific, challenging, and accompanied by commitment and feedback. So what's great about Jeannie's goal is she's going to do her laundry by tonight. We're going to check in on her Twitter feed tomorrow to see if that really happened. Actually,
See, now other people knowing about my goals and even more
well,
likely to do it.
so this is another interesting thing about technology and goals. Is that one of my neighbors said to me the other day, she was tweeting, and she said, "Oh, I'm just folding my laundry," and then her husband got home, and he's like, "So the laundry's done, right?" And she's like, "Oh no, I just said that on Twitter." So I think this is funny, especially because on Thursday, this may be a plug for Jeremy, who's coming to speak at the TSB series about truthfulness, right? Online. So 4 p.m. if you want to hear about truthfulness and Twitter. I'm really interested. So that's not what this topic is about, though. This is about trying to think about how to build a tool to support people's contributions to brainstorms and have them walking in the door feeling good about their contributions rather than rolling their eyes in dread about either their own ability or what it's going to be like as a team. And so this is a lovely tool that Patty helped design, which basically a week prior to the brainstorm, you get sent a prompt every single day that asks you a simple question. This was in preparation for a brainstorm about improving tourism in Evanston. And so some of the prompts included, what do you like about Evanston? Another prompt was, share a piece of advice that has been important to you regarding traveling. And you were either asked to respond with a 140 character reply or respond with a picture, depending on what the question was. And what happened was that you submitted that to the system, and then when you showed up, it looks something like this. You showed up, all the ideas were clustered on a projection on the screen, anonymized. There was no names associated with them. And then you had the blank whiteboard over here for generating ideas. It was quite interesting, the reaction. We did this with several teams. Watching the reaction when they walked into the room, it was different than what normally happens when you walk into a brainstorm and the walls are blank. It's like the Microsoft Word document being blank. And so in a lot of the work was already, or some of the ideas were already pre-populated. And it was very interesting the way we found people using this. They'd often reference it if they were getting stuck or there was a pause. One person who identified herself as a non-creative absolutely loved this because her name wasn't on anything, but yet she felt like she had already contributed before she walked in the door. And somebody actually thought one of her ideas was quite interesting. And so it really changed the dynamic from the people entering. From a efficiency and effectiveness standpoint, we did find that people who used the tool versus people who did not use the tool did increase the number of quality of ideas. There was a quicker shift from stimuli to idea, which was interesting to me. This is to say that in the non-prompt tool group, those teams would often spend a lot of time telling stories. They're like, oh, that time I went here and here and here. Has anybody been in a brainstorm? You know that person that goes on and on about their trip to wherever, and it has nothing to do with what they're getting to, or it takes them a while to get there. And what they were able to do in some ways is they had almost pre-told their stories with these images and these little notes, and so they got more quickly to ideas. And then what was interesting to me is that the visualization of this pre-work, some of these comments were interesting. Like, it helped frame our discussion, it gave us ideas to run off, and helped me to relate to team members. So very different response than I rolled my eyes when I got to the brainstorm. We're working right now, Tristan Skokel, who maybe is not in the room, we're working right now to see if we can actually have a much more sophisticated tool and actually try and deploy it in an S&P 500 company who's very interested in this product. So maybe we'll go there. In fact, somebody the other day suggested we put this on Kickstarter too, because it's slightly stalled. So maybe you'll actually see this on Kickstarter. The next study is also related to thinking about performance and how to improve performance. And the idea behind improving performance is that, again, it's that innovation, self-efficacy. If people see themselves performing well, they'll continue to perform well. And so this is a pretty extreme study that I'm going to share with you. And we're getting mixed results right now, but we're continuing with it because I think it has potential. We're trying to look at user interfaces right now, and this is done with a colleague at Adobe who's working on the product Adobe Ideas, and this is on an iPad. And increasingly, Adobe's finding that people are using iPads, especially people who do creative and work. They're using these iPads. They're traveling all around with them, and this is kind of a new platform for these people. And they're actually also developing this system for having this information stored on the cloud, so you'll no longer need your your computers with lots of memory. You'll just drag your documents from the cloud, work on them, throw them back up, and be on your way. So this was a small study. It started off as a much larger study that we did on Amazon Turk crowdfunding, but then we really wanted to pull it into a real tool as opposed to the crowdfunding or the crowdsourcing tool. And so we did this on Adobe Ideas. And here's the idea behind it, is this was motivated by some psychological research that finds when you prime people with positive affect, they actually do better at creative problem solving. And so the way psychologists who are very creative and clever about this in the laboratory is they give people candy bars, right, to make them happy. And I was like, wow, okay, how do we get a computer to give you a candy bar? And I couldn't quite figure that one out. And then so I thought, okay, what are other ways of priming? And another way of priming is showing pictures. And it turns out that pictures actually can induce affect. So if I show you a picture of a happy baby, you'll be happy. If I show you a picture of a dead body, sad. I show you a picture of a hammer, you'll be kind of neutral about the whole thing. So I think psychologists are fascinating. And as a designer, my goal is to translate what they do, which is really wonderful work in the laboratory, and figure out how in the world are designers going to use this information. And so this was our attempt to do it. So what did we do? We took the happy baby, the hammer, the dead bodies, and a baseline, which was nothing. And basically what we did is we gave people iPads who had never worked with iPads before, and we said, what we want you to do is spend 1 minute just playing around with the tool. Oh, and by the way, just grab an image from the image data bank and just scribble on that. Okay, so 4 conditions. The first condition, they grabbed a picture of a baby. Second condition, a hammer. Third, the dead bodies. And fourth, nothing. And here's what we found. Well, let me tell you about the task they did, and then I'll tell you what we found. What they were doing was something called the circles task, which is a common task, and I actually made a lot of you people in the room do this the other day. Now you know this is where it came from. What this is a task it's been established for 50 years or so, and basically what you do is you get a bunch of circles, and you ask people to come up with uses or unusual uses for the circle. And so people might do things such as this. What is this? What's this? Good. Okay, these are very common. What's that? Oh, see, I know. I got this the other day. Cubs copyright. I have never done this in Chicago until the other day. And everybody always says copyright, and then people said Cubs, so it doesn't work perfectly here. And then, so we basically looked at how unusual the ideas were that they generated. And then the other thing that we looked at, which was pretty interesting, is how elaborate were the drawings. So this is a picture of a, good, and this is a picture of a orange. But this person drew the whole fruit bowl, right? And this person just did a little twig at the top. So less elaborate, more elaborate. And what we found is that the positive prime did influence the number of highly original ideas generated, and it did influence the extent of the elaboration. And there was trends towards greater quantity, but not significant. And this was interesting to us because ultimately, while there's this notion that you do want more ideas, ultimately what you need is just one really good idea. So what we're doing right now is we're now working with some colleagues at MIT Media Lab and Princeton, and actually doing affective priming using music and some visual primes to figure out how contextualized can we get it, because frankly we'd like to get beyond this, right? We'd like to see, is there something we can do to improve performance? Okay. So, what do you do with all that? What you do with all that is you say, wow, technology perhaps can influence the way people think about themselves. And as a professor, here I am. My goal is to teach design and innovation. How is it that I might design an organization that enables people to build their beliefs in themselves? And so I'm fortunate enough to be here, and I'm fortunate enough to be working with some amazing people in the room who have said, yes, let's do it. And you all know who you are, and this is the story of Design for America, and how is it that we can actually not just create products, but how can we create organizations that encourage people to believe in their ability to innovate. So Design for America is based in a community of practice. We have undergraduate community. We have a multidisciplinary community of practice. Here we have local experienced professionals like Byron, who's in the room. Byron, can you hold your hand up? Thank you. As well as local clients. I don't think we have any local clients in the room, and alumni. And this is the face to these students. These students work on projects with local and social impact in the community, so very close by, and I'm going to illustrate what kind of projects these are. These are the faces of the students. They come from all different majors, which is quite exciting. And if you think about this from an innovation perspective, this is actually what is demanded of innovation, is domain expertise from many different places. We have professionals and faculty working with Design for America, wonderful, wonderful people. And then we have partner organizations, and that's actually one of the reasons we met. On the left is Sarah Elizabeth Ipples School, the woman I referred to at the beginning. You met her at a conference? How'd you meet her?
I met her at a bar.
That's what this all comes down to. Okay, you meet people at bars. Point. So in 2009, we started with one school, Northwestern. We're now up to 8 schools. We have a very ambitious goal to be up to 50 in 5 years. That is Design for America. Design for America is at universities throughout the country. We were privileged enough to be on the cover of Fast Company last month, which was really just an honor if you look at who else was in that magazine. And people, I've been reflecting quite a bit lately and saying, where did this come from? I know as a researcher, I'm very interested in innovation and people's beliefs in their innovation, but where did this come from, and what really helped to formulate some of the ideas around this? In 2000, I was working at a company called Wild Planet Toys, and I was working on something called the Kid Inventor Challenge, and this was like brand new. I feel like the internet was even brand new at that time. It's not totally true, but the idea that kids would be on the internet was kind of radical, and we weren't quite sure, will they really be on it, or will their teachers get on it? And the idea behind this was actually to get kids throughout the country working on toy design. And the real aha here was that when we went in to talk with kids about design and toy design, they were pretty intimidated by us. And they said, no, we don't know, you're the expert, you're the designer. And then what we did was we kicked off our shoes, we sat on the ground, and we put our feet up, and we started popping M&Ms in our mouth, but missing, so kind of just being inept, and that made them laugh. And then they said, oh, you guys don't know that trick. And then they started showing us how to pop M&Ms in our mouth. And then they said, okay, and maybe we can teach you a few things about toy design. So it was really about telling them that they were the experts in this domain. And what ended up happening is they ended up developing some toys that actually were made into production, and the stories of their production were on the back of the packages. And so in this experience, it was a visceral experience about realizing that people have the desire and the capacity to innovate. And even if you're 10, you have that desire. And this was my first kind of aha, that kids actually have the ability to connect online in 2000. Then fast forward, I went to the Stanford Design School, and I was really privileged to be participating in this activity, which was building the Stanford Design School. And really the idea behind this school was that everybody can learn design, and that you can learn design through peer-to-peer learning, and that actually it's not just about learning, but it's about thinking about the goals, beliefs, and emotion of the whole experience. So when you go into this space, this actually was a trailer park. This was the second design school space. It was the ugliest thing you've ever seen, but you walked into it and there was all of a sudden this feeling that anything was possible, and the realization that space and people and goals mattered. 2008, I had the privilege, Ed Colgate brought me here as a faculty member, very first faculty member. In 2008, there was an election going on at that time. for Obama. And I was struck by the way that technology was being used to coordinate effort, right, through all these distributed communities. It was quite impressive to me. And also what was impressive to me was the attention to local challenges. I had been coming from a place where everybody was focused on going abroad and traveling far. And perhaps it's just because I'm a homebody, but I thought this was so interesting that people were actually attending to their local community. And so then I show up and I start learning about things like ABET, which is the accreditation unit, and I start learning about the National Science Board. And here are all the industry and government expectations. If you don't know, we just went through this big process that people have for students here. They want you to be leaders in the movement towards the use of wise and informed and economical sustainable development. They want you to pursue careers in innovation. They want you to solve real problems, to understand societal issues, to work in multidisciplinary teams and to communicate effectively. And oftentimes they say we're falling short, that higher education, institutions of higher education are falling short in this. And so the research question in some sense here was actually, can we design an organization that helps people learn about their abilities through collaboration with perhaps mediation by technology? And so I pitched an idea very quickly to my very open-minded dean, Julio Otino, pitched it, literally ran from his office back to my office, made this PowerPoint website that I stole from a company with a related name, and made this book. Here's the elements I made. This came off of Bruce Ankerman's shelf. I put a sticky note here, and a sticky note here, and a sticky note here. That was my contribution to that object. And then I got a really positive email back from the dean. This is really interesting. We had a meeting with the students, Mert, Yuri, Hannah, other people in this room. Got a positive note back from Mert. Very quickly afterwards, we concluded that, I love this, Mert, I love this. We concluded that talent is everywhere around us in this university, from students to professors. What we truly need is passion to transform our knowledge into action. The true challenge that lies in front of us is to dig out what people are truly interested in solving. I could feel that the enthusiasm was contagious. Sincerely, Mert. So, but actually, I show that off because I thought this might just die. Like, we just threw this out. Who knows what's going to happen? What do I know? This is just an idea. And to get that email back was very, very meaningful. And it's something that I really prize. Because it meant that there was something to it, that you were interested. That was just an absolute honor, so thank you very much. So that summer, we, with this idea that Design for America might work, actually I have to tell you, everybody, I like this. Up at the top, I don't know if you noticed, it says, NUDA launched. I was like, NUDA? That's Northwestern University Design for America. We very quickly had to correct that. That didn't feel right. So we got DFA instead, Design for America. So what we did was we launched Design for America in the summer of 2009, and with some of these basic mindsets that the work that we'd be doing would be people-centered, we'd be obvious about our solutions. We'd work in rapid virtuous cycles, and we'd have what's called an attitude of wisdom, which is this idea of holding opinions strongly, but holding them weakly, so you're willing to change. And what's important about this is that if you're too confident, you won't learn anything. And if you're not confident enough, you won't take any risks. So there's a nice balance that you have to find. So we looked, being obvious, we looked local, right? Here's Northwestern, there's North Shore Hospital. What do they have going on? Well, it turns out they have this big problem. How do we get rid of hospital-acquired infections? 2 million people are infected. 100 million people die. This is a problem that costs this amount of money, lots of money. One of the solutions is washing your hands. So how do we get all medical staff to sanitize their hands at every opportunity? This is the challenge that Mert and Yuri are currently trying to make a company out of right now. Here they are when they were younger. They took a human-centered design approach. They went and actually hung out at the hospital and had this wonderful insight about these rods that hang down from the curtains. My suggestion is never to touch those rods. So there's all these moments in hand hygiene when doctors are supposed to, nurses are supposed to wash their hands, and they mean really well. They want to do this. This is not that they don't want to do this, but they're just constantly walking around, and this is, I love this drawing. I think Hannah did this, right? Oh, you already did this? Oh, okay, let me attribute that. So this, I love this drawing. Everybody gets what this is, right? This is a rapid prototype, right? This is, you didn't have to sketch. How long did it take you to do this, Yuri? 30 seconds, great. Does anybody can take a guess as to what this is trying to say?
They move a lot.
What?
They move a lot.
They move a lot. They move a lot. And what is it? And this is where the hand sanitation and sink are, and this is where the patient is. And it turns out there's this norm, it's quite a nice norm, that doctors and nurses like to maintain eye contact with you while in the room because they have such a short period of time in the room with you. And so every time they touch you, they're not likely to turn around and run back to the sink because they want to maintain eye contact. So they had that insight. Then they also had this other insight, which is as they were in the hospital rather, a nurse came up to shake their hands to be introduced and was carrying a glass with condensation on it, set it down, and then wiped her hands on her pants, and then shook their hands. That insight combined with a late night trip to the beach in which they were talking about ideas and thinking about this project, and as the story goes, as Mert tells it, got up. What do you do when you're a kid? You have sand on your hands. Moment. With that insight in mind that this was a natural cleaning motion, but that this is actually something that doctors are not and nurses are not supposed to do, they ran back to the machine shop here and created these very interesting looking prototypes. But they're not the ones to decide if the prototypes work. They brought them back. See, this is Mert with one on his scrubs. Brought them back to the doctors and nurses there. And are now working on a company that they call Swipe Sense, which is a comprehensive hand hygiene platform. I like that. It's nice. If you want, they can show you what they have. I don't know. I didn't know what level of disclosure we were in. So, okay, they can bring it over next. Great. So, what's really interesting to me is let's think about the role of technology for a moment. And I'm going to start by showing. This is a slide that Mert put up about a year ago, and he said the following. He said, "We're from Design for America, and these are our corporate sponsors." And I just love that he didn't have corporate sponsors. I wrote that. I just think that's great. I think that's really interesting. We're funded by Northwestern. But what's so interesting to me is that he thought this was the corporate sponsors. And when I started looking at the way they were working, they truly were. The way that they publicize some of their successes and on YouTube and Facebook, the way they Skype to connect with other people, the way they document their progress on Google Apps. So what I did was set out to do a study on this and looking at what are the elements of the environment that inform the developments of the belief. And this is work that I did with Jeannie Olson and Becky Komarak. Really privileged to work with these two women who are both involved with Segal as well as the School of Education. And it's a higher comment to say that this initiative could not be possible without a much larger group of people. And so we looked at this, and basically what we started to see is some interesting things. Just in the mind of time, I'll just read a few things. Is that we started asking people about their experience, and I thought some really interesting things came out of this. Is they said things like, DFA has changed how I look at problems. You experience the act of creating a solution, and because of that, I now look at problems and want to create a solution for them because I know it's possible. Whereas before, I was always like complaining about something and never really thinking, wait, there could be a solution. The second one I really like, which is pretty interesting, is learning how to do something when there's not a teacher breathing down your neck, telling you to get this reported. There's no one breathing down your neck, but it needs to get done. So it's a personal investment in the success or lack of. So it tells you something about where people are coming from when they work on these projects. Another one I like is we're talking with people about comparing this kind of work. I think it's really important to overlay this Design for America experience with classroom work and just to understand the synergies between them. One person said, because you get different kind of learning from different places. One student reflected, other classes handed us the problem on a platter and told, here's what the problem is, and you have to figure it out. In Design for America, you have to figure out what the problem is regardless of what the client says the problem is, which is really interesting because from an innovation perspective, what often happens if you talk to professionals who do this work regularly is that a huge part of the job is actually identifying what the real problem is. And oftentimes the problem you're given, if you will, is actually not the right problem. So these students transform from saying, what can we do, to saying, is there anything we can't do? And to me, that's the essence of what it's going to take to change our country. So what I'm going to suggest that we do is in HCI, design and education, we don't just think about functionality and usability. We want to start thinking about motivation. Does whatever you're designing inspire action? Positive emotions, goals, and beliefs. We heard, I'm going to suggest that the work that's being done at Northwestern and the stuff we've heard about in the prior talks does. I think Matt Easterday's work on Policy World is incredibly exciting. Matt, will you raise your hand? Thank you. He's over in CESP doing work at looking at how to teach people citizenry skills. Mike Horn's work, Mike, thank you. My colleague over at CESP as well is looking at technologies such as, and creating these incredible technologies such as NetTango to teach kids about programming. And so I'm going to end with this note in that, and the title of this lecture series is that I'm going to suggest that innovation, positive innovation as I'm calling it, is innovation that enables communities and societies to thrive. And this innovation depends on technologies and processes and practices that also enable people to thrive. So it's not just about the innovations we create, but the way in which we create them. And that ultimately is going to get us to this attitude, is there anything we can't do? Thank you to 1 million people who have helped with this work. Until what? No, until what? They were booing him until what happened? And he gave it to Patty. Right? That was interesting. Any other rules? Don't hit the lights is the rule. Okay, good. Okay, don't hold on to it. Nobody ran away. Great, like when it went out, people brought it back in. Great. No tea parties. Okay. Great, and what happened when people broke the rules? Not much. Why did people break the rules? To see what the rules were? Great, awesome. Why did you walk across?
Just for fun, just to see what happened.
Just to see what, curiosity. Okay. Anybody else? Anybody else break the rules?
Some people hit the lights, but that's strictly on accident.
Oh, okay. So they didn't mean to. There wasn't intention behind it. It was an accidental. At one point, anybody heard Mert yelled out something? I can't remember how the ball went. Do you remember what he yelled out? He said, "Watch this." Yeah, there's some show off over here. There's some show off. There was some show off.
And that was followed by too competitive.
You're right. Too competitive. Some commentary on what was appropriate for this game or not. And then there was he also at one point yelled innovation. And the reason, do you remember that?